We continue with the same chapter. The name of the chapter that we started in the previous class was the British policies and their impacts. Okay, and in the previous class we learnt about certain policies that were introduced by the British East India Company after they took over India, mostly Bengal. With that, we saw about the land revenue system that were introduced. Three types of land revenue system. What were they? The permanent settlement, the Roy Tourist system, and the Marwari system. Added to that, we also saw the introduction of transport and communication. Now, why the British East India Company introduced transport and communication system? That have also been explained to you all. They had their own personal motive, and it had an impact, or it helped the Indians as well. So today we are going to study about the education policy of the British East India Company. Education policy. Now, the British East India Company had already been in India for more than 50 years. Until then, they had done nothing, or they did not do anything in the field of education. Okay? And at that time, education in India was mostly religious. And it was the privilege of the rich upper sections of the society. What I am trying to tell is that education, the content or the subject that were taught were mostly religious, and only the richest sections of the society could afford to receive the education. Added to that, it was taught in classical languages. It was taught in classical languages such as Sanskrit, Arabic, and Persian. That was the background behind education. So now the British East India Company for the first time introduces a system of education in India. The British East India Company was asked to spend around 1 lakh rupees. 1 lakh rupees. 1 lakh rupees in the field of education. An act known as the Charter Act of 1813. Charter Act of 1813 was passed by the British government, and this act, the Charter Act of 1813, the Charter Act of 1813 instructed or directed the British East India Company to spend 1 lakh rupees for the education, or for the introduction of education system in India. Now, in the year 1813, how much was sanctioned? Rupees 1 lakh was sanctioned, or the British East India Company had to spend rupees 1 lakh for the education. But the money sanctioned remained unutilized, could not be utilized. It remained untouched for more than 2 decades. More than 2 decades or 20 years. For 20 years. In the year 1813, the Charter Act of 1813 directed the British East India Company to spend 1 lakh rupees in the field of education. But the money sanctioned remained untouched, unutilized for around 2 decades. That is for 20 years. Why? Because the Charter Act did not give any specific guidelines, did not give any specific instruction as to what sort of education to be introduced, what should be taught, and what should be the medium of instructions. So those things were not told by the Charter Act. It had only told that the company had to spend around 1 lakh rupees in the field of education. Are you getting it? That was one reason why the money could not be utilized, because the Charter Act did not give any guidelines or instruction as to what sort of education is to be introduced and what would be the medium of instruction. Is that clear? And in the meantime, there was a controversy, there is a debate between two groups. Two groups are created because of this, and the two groups are known as the Orientalist and the other group was the Anglicist. Okay, there was a controversy or a debate between two groups. Money has been sanctioned, what is to be done, nothing has been told. So there's a debate between, or two groups are created, and there is a debate between the two groups. The two groups were the Orientalist and the Anglicist. Got it? Orientalists were those group of people who favored the Indian system of education. Indian system of education in what you call classical languages. Okay? Orientalists were those group of people who wanted the continuation of the Indian system of education. What was the Indian system? It was mostly religious, and in what language? In the classical languages. So a group favored the continuation of the Indian system of education in classical languages, and these groups were known as the Orientalists. They were known as Orientalists. On the other hand, Anglicists were those group of people, okay, which was headed by British law member Lord Macaulay, okay, who favored the introduction of Western system of education. Western system of education where science, literature, etc. would be taught. Okay, they favored Western system of education, and the medium of instruction that they favored was English. Are you getting it or not? Okay? Because the Act did not tell what is to be taught, how it is to be taught, the debate came into existence. Two groups were created known as the Orientalists and the Anglicists. Orientalists were those group of people who favored the continuation, or who wanted the continuation of Indian system of education in classical languages. On the other hand, there was a group, okay, known as the Anglicists, who favored introduction of Western system of education, and the medium of instruction would be English. So this controversy went on. Finally, in the year 1835, the British East India Company introduced a new education policy. New education policy was introduced in the year 1835 by the British East India Company. According to this policy, what happened? They started, or they won over the Orientalists, and in the new education policy, Western science and literature was to be taught, and the medium of language communication was English. Are you following? The Orientalists lost the debate. The Anglicists won, and in the year 1835, new education policy was introduced, according to which, what type of education? Western system of education, where Western science, literature, etc. would be taught in what language? In English. Got it? Therefore, now to promote Western system of education, the British government opened English medium schools and colleges. English medium schools and colleges were introduced by the Britishers in India, okay? And in the year 1844, English became the official language in India. In the year 1844, English became the official language. Okay? Became the official language. Added to that, the British government also announced that the Indians, or those Indians who were educated in British schools, that is the schools run by the British East India Company, would be getting government jobs. So therefore, to attract many students or to impart or continue or extend the British system of education, new schools and colleges were opened by the British East India Company, where the new education policy was followed, where Western science and literature was taught. Added to that, it was announced that those Indians who were educated in English British schools or the schools run and colleges run by the Britishers would be getting what? The government jobs. So therefore, many Indians with the lure of getting government jobs went to the schools and colleges run by the Britishers, where what was taught? Western science and literature was taught in English. Okay? Are you getting it? I will revise it once again. Now let us go ahead and see the purpose. The purpose behind the introduction of Western education and what do you call language, communication, medium of instruction would be English. The Britishers or the British East India Company had certain purposes or certain motives behind the introduction of Western system of education in India. The first one, why they wanted to create a class of persons. They wanted to create a class of persons or a group of persons who in blood and color would be Indians. Which means they are Indians by blood and their color. Are you getting it? But British in morals, tastes, likes, etc. So okay, what did they want? They wanted to create a class of Indians who would be Indians in blood and color, just like you and me. But our taste, preference, likes, etc. would be all British, which means that they would be demanding what you call British-made goods, or demand all those things that were used by the Britishers and the Europeans. Are you following? First purpose why they wanted the Western system of education was to create a class of Indians who would be Indians in blood and color, but British in taste, morals, intellect, style, fashion, etc. and all. Okay, so they would be demanding what? British or European goods and commodities. So the next purpose what they wanted was, they believed that they would create a demand for British goods. There is demand for British goods. They are a commercial company, the motive is to make money. So behind the introduction of Western education, one of the purpose was that these educated Indians or westernized Indians or so-called the anglicized Indians would create a demand for British goods and commodities. The third purpose why they wanted was, now once the Indians are educated in British schools, so what happens? They also they are able to talk, communicate with one another, and they learn the British culture, they know the British system of education, and this would become a source of income for the Britishers. How? Because these educated Indians could be employed as clerks in the offices and the civil services. Okay? Employed as clerks in the offices run by the British East India Company. And that way it would reduce the expenditure for the British East India Company, because to bring officers all the way from Europe and England was very, very expensive for the Britishers. They had to pay high salaries now. Now what is the advantage? Indians are educated, now they can communicate with one another, they know the European style and culture. So therefore, these educated Indians could be employed as clerks in the factories, in the civil services. That way, in low salaries, that way it would reduce the expenditure of the British East India Company. That is the third one. The fourth purpose why they wanted the introduction of Western education was to inculcate in Indians, to cultivate, inculcate in Indians the spirit of what you call the inculcate in the Indians a sense of admiration. That means the educated Indians or British educated Indians would now start admiring the Britishers, the way they rule, their function and so on, and thereby what you call help or encourage the British rule in India. What I'm trying to tell is the fourth purpose was to inculcate a sense of admiration. Inculcate a sense of admiration, admire the Britishers, and thereby encourage or extend, continue or support the British rule in India. Are you getting me or no? These were some of the purposes why the Britishers wanted Western education. Now, next one, that was the motive behind it, the purpose behind introducing the Western education. It was introduced. Now it had some effects. What were the effects of the introduction of Western education? Effects of the introduction of Western education in India. Now what happens is, because of this Western education, what happens? English speaking graduates increased in India. What kind of graduates? English speaking graduates were introduced, were produced in the country. Many Indian graduates, now they went to the schools run by the British government or the Britishers. So therefore they could communicate everything and talk with one another. So they're called as the English speaking graduates. Okay. Now these English speaking graduates supported the Britishers and helped the Britishers to run the British Empire. Run the British Empire. That is the first one of the effect of the introduction of Western education. What was it? It produced English speaking graduates who helped the Britishers or who were the government to run the British Empire in India. Are you getting it? The second one. Now the English speaking graduates, they were so much anglicized, they had become so westernized that they forgot the Indian culture. They forgot the Indian culture. Most of them now they are not speaking in the vernacular languages. They stopped wearing Indian clothes, etc. They started adopting all Western methods, food styles, etc. Okay? They were so anglicized, they were so much, they were copied the Britishers to that extent that they lost they forgot their own culture and tradition. That was some of the effect of the introduction of Western education. What is the second one? The Indians or the English speaking graduates forgot Indian culture. They were so anglicized or they become so westernized that they forgot their own culture, tradition and so on. So these are the two effects of Western education. And besides this, so we can say this is a negative effect. Now we'll see the positive for the Indian side or the impact of Western education on Indians. Yes, there were some Indians who became so westernized, they patronized everything European and Britishers. But it also had some positive impacts on the Indians. What was it? First and foremost, Indians are educated now. Okay, they have learned about the European history, they have learned about the Britain, everything, So now they are aware of many things. The first impact of the introduction of Western education in India can be said that it aroused an awareness of the evil effects of the foreign rule. Okay, some of the Indians were educated, they were inspired, now they started analyzing. So finally what happens? It aroused in them, or it made them aware about the foreign evil effects of the foreign rule. This can be seen as the first positive impact on the Indians. Okay, as such what happens? Now, what is the medium of instruction? English. English became the official language, and now the means of communication also became English. So that way what happens? Regional barriers. Regional as well as language barrier. Language barrier and regional barrier broke down, which means a person at that time, they were not able to communicate with another person of a different region. Which means, let's say for example, a person from Sikkim was not able to communicate with the person from Kerala. Why? Because of language. Now, English had become a common language or a linked language. So that way, language barrier broke down and they started communicating with one another, sharing their ideas, etc. with one another. And that broke the regional barrier also. And what happens? Because of all this, a spirit of nationalism, that means we belong to one nation, one country. Okay, we are brothers and sisters of the same land, same motherland. That sort of feeling started, evolving, started coming out in the educated Indians, and it united them. And it united the Indians. First and foremost, what happens? It aroused or made them aware of the evil effects of the foreign rule. And what happens? Now because of that, the spirit of nationalism, which means we belong to one nation, though we are from different culture, traditions and all, we belong to one nation. That feeling came amongst the educated Indians and it united them. Because of all this later on, the spirit of nationalism comes into existence, and in the previous class also I told you, they all unite together and they start opposing the British rule in India. And in the year 1857, finally, for the first time, they all come together and fight against the British East India Company, which is known as the Great Revolt of 1857. Are you getting it? So what are things that we have learned so far? We were doing the impact, of the British policies. For the first time, after ruling for more than 50 years, the British East India Company took a step in the field of education, because an act which was passed by the British government told the East India Company to spend 1 lakh rupees in the field of education. However, the act did not tell what is to be taught, what should be the content, and in what should be the medium of instruction. Therefore, the money which was sanctioned remained untouched for 2 decades. Meanwhile, a debate where there was a controversy, 2 groups were created, known as what? The Orientalists and the Anglicists. Orientalists were the ones who favored continuation of Indian system of education. What was the Indian system? It was mostly religious and taught in vernacular languages. Whereas the Anglicists were the ones who wanted introduction of Western system of education, English as the medium of instruction. So finally in the year 1835, new education policy was passed, when Western system of education was introduced in India. And in the year 1844, English became the official language. And I told you how the Britishers encouraged the people to study in the schools and colleges run by the Britishers by announcing that the ones who study or ones who have graduated from the British colleges and all will be getting government jobs. After that, we saw the purpose, the intention of the British East India Company for introducing Western education. What are the first one? Create a class of Indians who would be blood and color in Indians in blood and color, but British in taste, morals, opinion, intellect, and so on. And these educated Indians could be employed as clerks in the factories, in the offices, and the civil services. And because bringing laborers or workers from all Europe or Britain was very expensive. So that way when Indians are employed as clerks in those salaries, that would bring down the expenditure of British East India Company. The third one we saw was that these graduates, English-speaking graduates, would create a demand for British goods and commodities. Then we saw the effect of introduction of Western education. It produced English-speaking graduates who helped the Britishers to rule or continue the British rule in India. It also produced some group of Indians who were so westernized that they admired everything that was made by British. They wanted to praise only the Britishers and all, that they forgot their own culture and tradition. So finally, we saw the positive impact of Western education. Yes, it also had lots of positive impacts. What were they? It aroused in them the awareness of the foreign rule. Okay? Then what happens? It inculcated amongst the educated Indians a spirit of nationalism and unity, and they spread with one another. And since English had become the official language, language, it also broke down the language barrier and the regional barriers. Okay, so this is the end of the chapter for you all. So please go to page number 95, question number 1. No, E, you can do E, 4, 5, then please go to question F5A. F5A. Okay, let's do that much. See you in the next class. Thank you.